We're learning more today about the misconduct allegations against former Republican House Speaker Dennis Hastert. A male claims he was sexually abused by Hastert decades ago when Hastert was a high school teacher and wrestling coach in Illinois. The former speaker has been charged with breaking banking laws and lying to the FBI when he started paying the man millions of dollars in hush money. Hastert, of course, is not alone on the list of former House lawmakers charged with breaking the law. Remember Mel Reynolds? Statutory rape. Dan Rostenkowski, mail fraud. Rod Blagojevich, corruption. Aaron Schock, who's being currently investigated for alleged corruption. And those are just former House lawmakers from the state of Illinois. Jason Johnson is a political science professor at Hiram College and an Al Jazeera political contributor. He joins us now from Atlanta. Jason, what do you make of the Hastert story?
I think this is one of those times where state prosecutors are probably high-fiving each other and saying we did a good job. To go back and essentially, we can say that this is about, Dennis Hastert misusing money, but really this is about getting after what is almost a 30-year cold case of possible sexual abuse. And I think that's what they were really trying to get through, and this was just the only way they could catch him. They're probably very proud of themselves at this point.
In other words, the statute of limitations had passed on any sexual misconduct allegations, perhaps, and so they see him withdrawing money and violating essentially wire transfer laws, and they figure, aha, this is how we can get him.
Yeah, this is pretty much, this is how all the great criminal masterminds and gangster movies in the 20s were caught. It was also very telling. When I read this original indictment that was released yesterday, it was very telling. The FBI did not pursue the gentleman he was making the payments to for extortion. And that's really telling that they didn't think that someone who was being paid $3 million was extorting Dennis Hastert. Obviously, whatever Hastert did that they're aware of was so heinous that they thought that that was a greater crime than him possibly having to pay $3 million.
I wonder if this changes any of the political history in terms of what we were all looking at and covering back at the end of 1998. Bill Clinton was facing impeachment proceedings in the House. Newt Gingrich comes back and decides to resign his speakership. Bob Livingston becomes the House Speaker and resigns after a day because of his extramarital affair. They can't decide on who the replacement is, so it's Denny Hastert. He's squeaky clean. Nobody has an issue with him. And all the while, at least in Hastert's own mind, perhaps, he had this skeleton in the closet.
Well, it's interesting. He wasn't approached by this individual A until 2010. So the truth of the matter is he might have thought that he had gotten away with this. I mean, obviously this was behavior that he engaged in when he was a wrestling coach and a teacher. And just like other people who've been accused of this kind of behavior, Jerry Sandusky's and other people who've done this kind of abuse, oftentimes they think they're going to get off scot-free. Oftentimes they don't think they're ever going to get in trouble. So I'm sure when the job of Speaker in the House fell into his lap, he figured, I'm scot-free. I'll get away with anything I ever did.
There was a scandal involving Congressman Mark Foley that a lot of people blame essentially Denny Hastert for not doing enough and essentially causing Republicans to lose their majority to Democrats. And it involves that Mark Foley was there doing things with pages and Hastert knew about it and tried to sort of ignore it, and then it all came out. And there's this air of sort of corruption hanging over Hastert and Foley that cost them. How does that scandal look now?
Well, that scandal looks like the tip of the iceberg. Remember, we also had Larry Craig, who was questioned on these sorts of things as whether he was soliciting a prostitute in a bathroom, but that goes back to the Page scandal in the 1970s and your early 1980s. There is a culture of corruption. As much as this is an overused term, there is a culture of corruption about underage children with all too many members of Congress on the Republican and the Democratic side. And I think while a lot of times we'll chase around consensual affairs between adults, I think there needs to be much more strict scrutiny and much more concern about the behavior of many of these men and sometimes women with young people.
Is there also a culture of hypocrisy? Because a number of Democrats are pointing out today that when Denny Hastert was Speaker of the House, he made it essentially very difficult. If you knew about some sort of an incident or sexual misconduct involving somebody and you didn't report it, you yourself could be vulnerable to being charged with a crime.
I mean, there's so many glass houses and so many stones being thrown. It's like the end of Die Hard where people are just walking over glass. Like, I can't believe any member of Congress has the audacity to criticize anyone else on sexual behavior, given half the stuff that they know is going on that they don't report. So, Hastert being a hypocrite isn't surprising. We've seen that throughout the years with members of Congress. But I also think that this level of scrutiny, that it's a shame that it took local investigators in Illinois to really bring this to bear, when really really, Congress themselves should be self-regulating this kind of behavior.
Any political fallout? I mean, as we mentioned in the intro, he's now, what, the fifth former member of Congress to get in some trouble, and that's just in Illinois over the last 25 years. Any stink that stays on current members of Congress or the current House?
Well, I'll tell you this. When you actually stand out as one of the most corrupt politicians in Illinois in the last couple of years, that's bad. So that is a very telling thing as what the legacy will be. But I think, we're in an election year, so unless somehow this ends up getting connected to Rand Paul or Bobby Jindal or somebody else like that, I don't think it's going to have a huge consequence. But I do believe that any smart Republican right now is looking throughout their caucus and saying, look, if you got any trouble, back out now. We don't need these kind of scandals heading into 2016.
Jason Johnson, a political science professor at Hiram College, is also an Al Jazeera America political contributor. Jason, always great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.